a great pleasure for me to be here on the IOA PG teaching platform. And I wish to thank Dr. Dhawan along with Dr. Meena, Dr. Srivastav, and Dr. Rajgopal for this opportunity. Whenever we are dealing with uh, the history and the examination, we have to first be aware that, what are the various conditions, and broadly we can divide them into traumatic, which may be acute chronic, or non-traumatic, which you can see here. I particularly like this acronym CT Medino. So, it can divide all the conditions around the knee in congenital, traumatic, metabolic. I is for inflammatory or idiopathic, degenerative, infective, neoplastic or neurovascular, and others. So the PGs should always remember this mnemonic CT Medino, and which covers all the possible etiological factors and the conditions. And these are the various conditions which you should know, because the eye can only see what the mind knows. So you should basically know all these conditions, and this is your theoretical backup, which I'm not going to go in the details. Clinical evaluation, the examination, the history becomes easy. So with this preamble, I think history is most important. You will get the knee as a short case in your exam, and therefore the history is 50% of your diagnosis, or I would say even more. Pain is the most presenting and the most important component, and you've got to find out the duration of pain, how it affects the activities of daily living. Also the aggravating, the relieving factors, those are very important. The site of pain is again important, and you've got to ask the patient specifically to point the site of pain with one finger, and that way exactly where the pain is coming from. As in any joint, may it be the hip joint, shoulder joint, you have to go through the onset, duration, the progress, the character of pain. Is it a continuous pain? Is it only at rest? If it is an infection pain, it will be only at rest. If it is a mechanical pain, it will be only on movement. And what aggravates it, what relieves it, what are the activities related to increase in pain, and especially in degenerative conditions, we've got to understand what activities of daily living are affected. The site of pain is very important, because if the site is anterior, then these are the conditions which can happen. And this lecture is going to be available for all the PGs later on also, so you can visit this slide later on. I don't want to go much in detail, but I've covered all the conditions which can present with anterior knee pain. The medial will be the medial meniscus, pes bursonitis, also sometimes the medial meniscal cyst, which are less common as compared to the lateral. The lateral can be the meniscal pathology or the IT band syndrome, and the posterior can be the Baker's cyst, the popliteal artery aneurysm, or some nerve tumors. The history, there are two main things when you're dealing with the knee examination: whether there is a history of trauma, is it there or not. If the history of trauma is not there, then you are completely left with non-traumatic conditions, which we will talk about. If the history of trauma is there, then you've got to think of your internal derangement of knee, your meniscal injuries, chondral injuries, ligament injuries, and so on and so forth. Another important thing, if the history of trauma is not present, then the age of the patient is something which is very important. If the age is less than 50 years, then you are dealing with different conditions. If it is more than 50 years, then almost be sure that if the history of trauma is not there, then it is mainly a degenerative condition you are dealing with. If there is a history of trauma, there are various ways the knee can get injured, and one of the common injuries is the dashboard injuries, where you get a PCL tear. As you can see here, the sudden breaking, there is a direct impact on the tibia goes behind and the PCL gets torn, and this is the telltale sign where you can see that is anterior bruising, and this is a direct injury where the PCL can be torn. So you should be aware of this. The mechanism of injury is very important, and mainly the meniscal and ligament pathologies are seen. Can you see the video? I hope. So when there is the tibia is fixed and the femur rotates on it, there is the external rotation, internal rotation of the femur on the fixed tibia, which produces the ligament injuries, the meniscus injuries, and one has to be aware that the mechanism of injury, what it is, and accordingly you can find out whether it is a ACL tear, meniscal tear, medial or lateral meniscus. One of the most important symptoms, or what you got to understand, is the history of instability. The patient, when it is a chronic condition, especially with a ligamentous injury, will come with symptoms of instability, And instability on history, how do you elicit? You ask the patient whether there is a history of giving way sensation. If there is any kind of wobbly sensation, especially if the patient is coming up and down the steps, does he feel a little less confident with the affected knee as compared to the unaffected knee? If he wants to run and play a game or catch a bus or do something, does he feel less confident? So if all these symptoms are there, and if the answer to this is yes, I feel less confident, I feel giving way sensation, I feel wobbling, then there is instability. That is what you have to understand. And these are the various types of instabilities. This is a more theoretical slide again. I don't want to go into detail, but suffice to say that we mainly deal with one plane instabilities and rotatory instabilities, though combined instabilities are not so common unless there is a dislocation of the knee where we have the KD classification. So, but what you should understand is the one plane instabilities, varus, valgus, anterior, posterior, and the rotational instabilities, which can happen mainly the posterolateral corner gets injured or the anterolateral. So this is what you should know. You should also ask the patient for history of any sounds with the movement. With every flexion extension, is there any kind of sound which comes? Is there any crepitus? If there is a crepitus with every flexion extension, then you can suspect maybe there is a chondromalacia patelli. There may be a patellofemoral arthritis, and that causes fine crepitus which may be present. If there is a clicking sound, then there sometimes this clicks may be associated with some loose fragments inside. It may be because of osteophytes inside, or also at times you can get it in meniscal tears. So there is a click of the knee which the patient feels with the movements of the knee. If the patient has a thud or a clunk, then there are a couple of conditions we should think of. The patient complains of clunk. Here you can see a patient with a patellar clunk, which is seen after a total knee replacement. And this is where the patella, there's a nodule which gets stuck between the patella and the trochlear notch of the femoral component, and it gets released when it is being extended. So this is a patellar clunk. You can also get a clunk of the discoid meniscus, discoid lateral meniscus in the adolescent age group. And if that is there, these are very diagnostic clunks. At times you can get snapping of the knee, and this can be because of the IT band over exossus or the lateral epicondyle, which sometimes in thin patients is quite prominent. It may be because of the semitendinosus over exostosis on the medial side, or sometimes the biceps over the head of a prominent fibula. You may get snapping of the knee. So if the patient complains of crepitus, click, clunk, and snap, these are the various conditions which you should think of. Also, the patient may complain that he has a stiff knee, and then you've got to find out again, the most important thing, is it a traumatic history or a non-traumatic stiff knee? So then immediately, the causes are different. If it is post-trauma, then it's maybe because of post-traumatic fixations or because of adhesions. It can be, or if it is non-traumatic, it can be because of rheumatoid, where you get adhesions. And then also sometimes in certain infections you can get adhesions. At times conditions like reflex sympathetic dystrophy or chronic regional pain syndrome can give rise to the stiffness of the knee. So you've got to take the history to rule out these causes. Another history is that you should ask the type of pain, and sometimes the patient's knees are grossly deformed, but there is no pain, and this is the time you should suspect the neuropathic joints. Therefore a history can very well tell you that this is a neuropathic joint. The important thing is, again, because this particular history can also help you with the examination, the diagnosis, and ultimately the management, the ambulatory status of the patient, whether the patient is a household ambulator, community ambulator, does he require any stick, crutches, or kind of Zimmer's frame, walker to walk, or is the patient wheelchair bound? Because these are again important histories you should ask your patient. Many times you also got to ask the patient that even though the patient has a knee pain, and at times later on I will cover it, that the knee x-ray is normal, but then many a times the referred pain from the hip and the spine can go to the knee, and therefore be very, very pertinent in asking the history of hip pain or back pain whenever you are taking the history of knee conditions, because you will be surprised that sometimes osteoma of the hip can present with the referred pain to the knee, or certain discs or the Spondylodiscitis pain can be referred to the knee from the spine. So be careful of that. The last history which I would like you to take is that suppose the patient's X-ray is normal, and then but the pain is too much, that the X-rays is disproportionate to the pain. Then these are the times you've got to take the history related to cellulitis, then maybe low-grade intra-articular infection, or again it may be a condition of reflex sympathetic dystrophy. So that's how the history will really help you, to come to these various diagnoses. And with this, then these are the various symptoms. We saw the history, the symptoms, and then we'll come to the signs. So these are the various symptoms which can happen and the patient can complain. The three main symptoms, please remember, are pain, swelling, and the symptoms of instability. So that is important, and the patient will complain of limb, locking, giving way sensation, sounds, which I've already spoken about. And these are the conditions which you've got to be careful about and elicit them in your history. And these are the various symptoms which the patient will present with. Let's come to the second part of the talk. We saw the history till now, and now we will talk about the physical examination. You've done the history, you've come to a certain diagnosis in your mind. Firstly, whether it is a traumatic condition or a non-traumatic condition. If it is traumatic condition, then whether it is an acutely presenting knee or is it chronic. With these things in your mind, you know what you're dealing with. If it is a chronic condition with a trauma 3 months ago, then you're dealing with some internal derangement like a ligament injury or a meniscus tear, or can be a cartilage injury. While if there is no trauma and if the age is above 50, you're dealing with a degenerative condition. So please keep that in mind. When you come to the actual clinical evaluation, keep a routine in your mind. Right now, you should go through the standard routine which has been mentioned in the textbooks, like inspection, palpation, range of motion, strength testing, special tests, and the neurovascular status assessment. And the special tests are very important, especially in examination of the knee joint. Important is to adequately expose the knee joint. You should be able to see the entire knee joint, the proximal thigh, the distal part of the knee. And then you've got to examine the knee in the supine position, that is sleeping, the lateral position, prone position, and standing position. And always compare on the unaffected sides. That's the advantage of having two knees. So always compare, that itself gives you a clue what is going on. Whenever the patient is standing, what you've got to observe, what is the alignment, whether it is a varus alignment or valgus alignment. And if it is varus, then you can measure the intercondylar distance, and this is the how the classification is. If it is valgus, then you've got to measure the intermalleolar distance, and this is the classification of that. So bow legs, also called as varus deformities, you can measure the intercondylar distance. Knock knees, the intermalleolar distance, that is the valgus deformities. Also, you can see sometimes the side swipe deformities where you have varus on one side and the valgus on one side, and the recurvatum deformities where there is hyperextension. So this can be found out on inspection. That is very critical. Then you come to the gait. There are various types of gait. You can see a gait with the varus knee, the hyperextension knee, with a valgus knee. Sometimes you can have a patient who has an unstable knee and is walking with a varus thrust, which can be because of the varus, the primary varus or the secondary varus. What you've got to understand that whenever the patient is walking, and for a normal gait, you need at least 70 degrees of flexion. Anything less than that, the gait is going to be affected. Also, you need 81 degrees to ascend stairs, 85 degrees to descend stairs, and you need 90 degrees to rise from a chair. So remember that anything which reduces your knee flexion is going to affect the gait, and then accordingly you can describe what the type of gait is. In inspection, you've got to also see the transfers, the scars which are present, because it's very important if you're planning some surgical intervention, where is the scar, and this will help you to plan your incision. Again, the most important thing is that the scar should not be adherent to the underlying structures, and you should be able to just pinch the skin above. And if you can pinch the skin above, then it is not going to be a problem for the surgery. But if it is stuck to the bone below, then you probably to have a plastic surgical consult and may require a flap or something to make the skin couple. Another important thing in inspection is to see the atrophy of the muscles. Many times, because of disuse in chronic conditions, you get quadriceps atrophy, as you can see here. The hamstring muscles atrophy is less, but the quadriceps is very sensitive, and disuse immediately leads to quadriceps atrophy of, and then you've got to really see that on inspection. Again, inspection, you see the various superficial anatomy. You can see the medial and lateral parapatellar fossa, the medial and lateral borders of the patella, and then the superior pole and the inferior pole of the patella if there is no hemarthrosis or no swelling. And if the patient is thin, then you can see all this, or sometimes in a swelling of the knee because of trauma or other conditions, you may get a situation where these foci are obliterated. So you should keep in mind the normal foci around the knee. Also from the side, you can see the tibial tuberosity. You have to see the joint line, whether there are any cysts, the lateral meniscal semilunar cyst or the medial meniscal cyst or the tibial tuberosity. If it is very prominent, then you understand that if the tibial tuberosity is prominent on inspection, then in the adolescent age group, you're looking at a condition called as a Osgood-Schlatter's disease, which is the apophysitis of the tibial tuberosity. So you have to be, where the swelling is, where the prominence is, you can come to some diagnosis. Also, when you do the palpation, you should palpate the joint line and the medial side, especially the MCL, where it is attached to the medial epicondyle and below on the tibia, the pes ancillaris. So therefore, the palpation on the medial side gives you a lot of clues to what the diagnosis might be. Again, from the lateral side, you can see the lateral collateral, then you can see the tibial tuberosity again. And the important thing is the lateral joint line. So joint line is something which is very important, and you've got to palpate the joint line by first palpating the tibial tuberosity, then the forefingers move up and you feel a sudden dip going inside, and that is where the joint line is. Also, you should make the patient prone and then see for any swellings posteriorly. You may see that there is a prominence here. Then there may be a Moran-Baker cyst, which is a very common condition which is seen, which manifests by a swelling posteriorly. And this swelling, it disappears on flexion and becomes prominent on extension. You've got to keep in mind at times you may be surprised there may be a popliteal artery aneurysm. And if you do the transillumination test here, you will know, or sometimes you will also have to auscultate, you may get a bruit there. So whenever there is a swelling around the knee, again, this is a very busy slide, but you can visit this later or take a screenshot now. What are the various swellings which are present on the medial side? You have the whole list, the lateral side, the posterior, and the suprapatellar pouch. So this is where you can see the swellings, and this particular slide will give you all differential diagnosis which can be present for swellings around the knee. And please visit this slide later when you have more time. The range of motion is something very important, and the range of motion in the knee is 0 to 140, but you will find certain textbooks which say that the movement can be even 150 or 160. What I want to tell you is that if the heel touches the buttock, then the range of movement is about 150, 160. But in obese patients, because of the fat, the heel cannot touch the buttock and it may be about 130, 140. Does that mean it is abnormal? No, that is the normal movement, and it can be anywhere from 0 to 140 or 160. So that's how you see the flexion and extension. You see it in supine position as well as the prone position. Next, we come to the measurements. This is again very important to find out the wasting of the muscles, and there are certain other measurements also you have to do. So you palpate the superior pole of the patella and take a fixed point 6 to 8 inches above, and then at that make a marking and measure the girth at that point of the thigh. That will tell you whether there is any wasting of the quadriceps. Similarly, palpate the tibial tuberosity, go to about 4 to 5 inches below that on a fixed point, and again measure the circumferential girth of the leg, and that will tell you whether there is any wasting of your hamstring or the gastrocnemius muscles. Again, Q angle, Dr. Rajesh alluded to it when he spoke about the biomechanics, but this is again can be measured, and it's a clinical test. So you've got to measure, and in your exams, if you get a short case and if you draw it, there's a point on the ASIS, the center of the patella, and from the center of the patella to the tibial tuberosity. So the angle subtended by these two lines, the ASIS to the center of patella and from the center of the tibial tuberosity, is called as the Q angle, and it varies from 14 to 17 degrees. Higher the Q angle, it is more predisposed for subluxation of the patella, the lateral subluxation. and this angle is increased by the position of the tibial tuberosity if it is more lateral, by the valgus, or if there is increased femoral anteversion. All these things can increase the Q angle and therefore make the patella more prone for subluxation laterally. There are three important concepts which you've got to understand when you're dealing with movements, especially in the knee. And these are very pertinent to the knee. You've got to understand what is a fixed flexion deformity. You've got to understand what is an extensor lag. And you've got to understand what is a lock. So whenever there is a fixed flexion deformity, then there will be further flexion. There cannot be any extension. So please remember, if there's a fixed flexion deformity, this can be because of a bony block. If this can be because of deformity, it can be because of inflammatory or degenerative conditions, and further flexion is possible. But if the flexion deformity is because of muscle spasm, then under anesthesia or once the patient is relaxed, it may correct. So there are two types of flexion deformities, fixed and correctable, and you've got to distinguish between the two. So that's one, that is the flexion deformity. This, before I move on to explain what is the extensor lag or locked knee, what I want you to understand is the extensor mechanism apparatus. So the extensor mechanism apparatus is made up of the quadriceps muscle, which inserts on the proximal pole of the patella with the medial and lateral retinaculum and the expansions. Then it includes the patella, then the patellar tendon, and the tibial tuberosity. So this whole apparatus, the quadriceps muscle inserting into the patella with the medial lateral expansions, the patellar tendon, and the tibial tuberosity, the whole thing is called as the extensor mechanism apparatus. And any damage to the extensor mechanism apparatus can cause an extensor lag. For example, if you get a rupture of the quadriceps from the proximal pole of the patella, this can be clinically found out by just as a dent, and you can actually put a finger and you can palpate a gap between the proximal pole of the patella and the quadriceps muscle, and there is a rupture of the quadriceps. So that's the diagnosis here. So what this rupture of quadriceps will do, it will give an extensor lag to the patient. Like the patient can extend the knee up to let's say 30 degrees. So that means there is a 30-degree extensor lag, and the further extension up to full is possible passively. So once again, just see the video. The patient is extending up to about 40 degrees. So there's a 40-degree extensor lag, and the further extension is possible fully passively. So this is an extensor lag. Don't confuse it with a flexion deformity or a locked knee. And this is because of the quadriceps mechanism disruption or the weakness of the quadriceps muscle due to many reasons, and we can talk about it. The last concept which I want to explain to is the locked knee. So the knee, when we say is locked, is stuck in the position of a flexion of the knee, and it may be because of a mechanical block, or it can be also because of a pseudo locking, that is, there is just a muscle spasm and does not allow further movements. But when we say the knee is locked, it is mostly because of mechanical reasons, where there may be a loose body, maybe a meniscal tear or a nodule of the anterior cruciate ligament tear, which is locking the knee and preventing full extension. So once you remove the mechanical block, the knee can extend, and patients at times, they can do it themselves. They tell you the history that my knee gets locked, then I do a trick movement, and then I can unlock it, and then my knee can extend fully. So that is the locking of the knee. So friends, please remember, a locked knee is different, a patient with an extensor lag is different, and a patient with a fixed flexion deformity is different. What are the causes of a locked knee? As I just said, it can be the loose bodies, meniscal tear, osteochondral fragments. At times, the patella is dislocated, and that breaks the lever arm, and the extension can become difficult, and sometimes synovitis also causes locking. There are various types of loose bodies, and this can be again one of the favorite questions of your examiner. Maybe fibrous loose bodies, fibrinous, maybe cartilaginous because of flaking of the cartilage, or osteocartilaginous, which can be because of OCD, the osteochondritis dissecans. So these are the various types of loose body, and also you may get a short note in your exam, and this is favorite question of the examiners, where they'll ask you what are the types of loose bodies which you see in the knee joint. Coming to the strength testing, this is easy. You know that you have to test the flexors as well as the extensors. The quadriceps helps in extension, and hamstrings help in flexion. So you test both, and then you find out how much the power is on your muscle charting grade 0 to grade 5. Another important thing is you have to always see the distal pulses, because in many conditions which may not be directly related to the knee, you may have absent pulses. There may be, the arterial diseases, venous problems like the Raynaud's disease, or there may be aneurysm of the popliteal artery. So you've got to find out what the causes and palpate the distal pulses. If you don't palpate it, then the investigations further in terms of a handheld Doppler assessment or DSA may be required. Now, coming to the most important part of the knee examination, these are the special tests. Now, if you see various books, there are so many special tests which are given, but I'll stick to the important special tests which are required for you to be done in the short case examination. Otherwise, we can spend another 1 hour and still not finish all the special tests. So let us talk about the patella first. The patella, we have to do two tests. One is the gliding test and one is the lifting of the patella. So once the gliding is, you can just push the patella down and move it in the trochlear groove. If the patient gets pain, then there is a patellofemoral pathology, or you can tilt the patella and pick it up on one side. If the tilt is more than 15 degrees, then it is pathological. Up to 15 degrees tilt is possible even in a normal patient. In a thin patient, you can see it. But if it is tilting more than that, then there's obviously some kind of instability issue with the patellofemoral joint. You move it from side to side, and also while moving it, you can draw four quadrants, which are the vertical lines. The patella is divided into four quadrants, and if the knee moves from side to side in more than two quadrants, then it is abnormal. Up to two is less, and if it moves only one quadrant, then there is spasm. That is what you should understand. This is another way to measure the patellar glide. So whenever you're dealing with stiff knee, the patellar glide is an important assessment, because if the cause of your stiff knee is intra-articular, then the patella will be stuck below, and then that is maybe the reason of your stiff knee. But if your patella is moving and the knee is stiff, most of the times the cause will be extra-articular. So patellar mobility is an important marker to assess whether the cause of a stiff knee is intra-articular, where the patella may be stuck, or extra-articular, where the patella is mobile, where the quadriceps may be adhered to the femur and causing extra-articular stiffness. You also should do the patellar tap test, where you squeeze in the fluid or the blood if it is hemarthrosis below, and then you tap it and see the patellar tap, and where the patella goes down and comes up again. This is positive in cases of hemarthrosis, sympathetic effusions, or infection where there is pus inside the joint. You can also do the ballotment test, and again, in patellofemoral instability, the ballotment is positive. It may move very easily outside. And another important test is the transillumination test, which you should do, where you put the torch on one side and then
Dr. Rajgopalan, can you mute? Yeah.
put uh, the uh, the torch on one side and then roll a paper, make like a pipette, and see from the other side for the transillumination. The importance of a transillumination is that if there is fluid is clear, then you will see the transillumination test positive. Right? If it is a sympathetic effusion, if it is a cyst or a bursa, where there is clear fluid, you will have transillumination test positive. If the transillumination test is negative, then that means whatever is inside the swelling, it is thick pus, maybe hemarthrosis, or maybe a solid swelling, maybe a neoplastic condition where it is a solid swelling, and you will get transillumination negative. So please keep that in mind, and that's very important. Another test is for the patella is the apprehension test. And the patient, if he has a habitual dislocation of patella or patellofemoral instability because of an MPFL tear or whatever reason, you try to push the patella laterally, the patient suddenly feels very scared and he feels fearful. So when you're doing the test, your hand should be pushing the patella outside, but you should be looking at the patient's face. And he suddenly becomes very scared and apprehensive and anxious. So that means the patellar apprehensive test is positive. And this patellar apprehension test can be positive in patellar dislocation. I will just like to tell you the basic difference between a habitual dislocation of patella, where the patella dislocates with every flexion extension, and recurrent, where it may not dislocate with every flexion extension. So that is the importance of the seeing the patellar movements on flexion extension, habitual dislocation, and recurrent dislocation. J sign is something very important again because of patellofemoral instability. And if the J sign is positive, as you can see very classically in this case, then it is because of the MPFL tear or other reasons of patellofemoral instability which need to be addressed. So a positive J sign is a pathognomic of a patellofemoral instability, and most of the times it's an MPFL tear. Now coming to the signs of anterior cruciate ligament tear, the first test you do is the Lachman test. Now this is again what we're talking about, the single plane instability. Do the Lachman test. This is done at 30 degrees of flexion, where one thumb is on the tibial tuberosity and going towards the joint line. 4 below in the popliteal fossa, just below that, and you hold the thigh with the thumb and pull the tibia up. And if it moves anteriorly more than 1.5 centimeter, then this is a positive Lachman test. There are 3 grades: grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and grade 2 doesn't have, grade 3 doesn't have an endpoint, and grade 2 and grade 3 indicate anterior cruciate ligament. As you can see here, this is the positive test for Lachman's, and you can see here again the Lachman test is positive, and at times you have to be careful. In some patients it may be because of the PCL tear, and we'll talk about it in a minute. This is the next test, the anterior drawer test. This is done by keeping the knee at 90 degrees. There are both your thumbs are anterior, the tibial tuberosity going towards the joint line, and you pull the tibia in front. Again, the laxity is measured 3 to 5, grade 1, 5 to 10, grade 2, and grade 3, if anterior drawer is positive, is indicative of ACL tear. So that is important. You always compare it in the opposite side so that you know how much the tibia is coming in front. And again, you should not confuse this with the posterior drawer. Then coming to the rotatory drawer test, also called as the Slocum's test. So how do you do the rotatory drawer? You keep the foot in 30 degrees internal rotation, and then you sit on it and then do the anterior drawer, or then you keep it in about 15 degrees external rotation and sit on the leg and then do the anterior drawer. If in internal rotation anterior drawer is positive, then you're suspecting the lateral side injuries. It may be the posterolateral capsule, arcuate complex, and the lateral cruciate ligament. If the rotatory drawer, that is the Slocum's test, that is the rotatory drawer, is positive in external rotation, then you're looking at the damage to the medial structures, the medial collateral or the posterior medial corner or the posterior oblique ligament. So this is the importance of the rotatory drawer test, also called the Slocum's test. And this is how the test is done. This is just to show that you externally rotate, sit on that literally, put 2 fingers on tibial tips a little ahead, and then you do that test. Similarly, then you do it in internal rotation. And of course, the first time you have done it in neutral, then you put it in internal and then do again the rotatory drawer. And if it is positive, this is what you will see. There is the anteromedial structures on the anterolateral structure. So this is again a test which is used for the rotatory instability. Now we've started seeing the rotatory instability tests, and these are the most important tests, also called as the pivot shift test. The pivot shift test is done from extension to flexion, and remember, if it is a reverse pivot, then it is done from flexion to extension. The classical pivot shift test is done from extension to flexion, and when you make the knee completely extended, apply valgus force and externally rotate the tibia, then at this point, if there is an injury, especially the ligament injury, then the tibia subluxates, and from extension, as you go into flexion at 30 to 40 degrees, the IT band pushes the knee back into its place, and that goes back with a clunk, and that is called as a positive pivot shift test. So please remember, it is done in full extension. Then you externally rotate the foot and give the valgus stress and then start flexing, and 30 to 40 degrees it goes back into place. And this is how it is done. You can see a positive pivot shift. If it is an explosive pivot, grade 3, what we call pivot, then you've got to suspect an anterolateral complex injury. And again, you can see here how the pivot shift test is done. Give valgus, give internal rotation, and then flex from the extended position. Coming to the test for the posterior cruciate ligament, on inspection, you will see that there is a posterior sag, very classically seen here, and you can suspect this is a spot diagnosis of a posterior cruciate ligament. Also, you do the posterior drawer. From the neutral position, you go behind And this is the classification for that. Normally, we know that the step off is present, that is that the tibia is in front of the femur. But if it is grade 1, then it is at slightly anterior. If it is grade 2, it is flush. And grade 3 means the tibia goes behind. And this is how the posterior drawer test is done. And that will indicate a tear of the posterior cruciate ligament. So this is how your posterior drawer is done. And again, you can do a rotatory posterior drawer also. This is an active quadriceps test where you can see that the knee is flexed at about 90 to 100 degrees, and then you ask the patient to contract the quadriceps, and he can contract it, and therefore this gives the instability, and this can be seen in PCL deficient knees, chronic conditions, and also along with the posterolateral corner, you can see it. Sometimes the patient can do these trick movements also in lax joints. So you've got to be careful whether this test is a pathologic test or is it just a physiologically, very loose joint and patient is doing your active quadriceps test. Coming to the valgus and varus stress is important. The valgus stress is done at 30 degrees and at 0 degrees. In extension, if it is positive, that means it is a severe injury. Along with the MCL, it may be the posterior medial capsule or the posterior oblique ligament. If it is in 30 degrees, if the valgus stress test is positive, then it's only the MCL. And this is how the test is done. You can do this is the varus stress test for similarly the lateral structures. If the varus stress test is positive in full extension, then it is along with the LCL, it is the other structures, the posterolateral corner, the arcuate complex. And if it is in 30 degrees, then it's only the lateral collateral ligament. If it is the posterolateral corner, then there are these special tests which you should know for testing the posterolateral corner injuries. This is the dial test. And it is done in 30 degrees flexion, as you can see here, and also the same test is done in 90 degrees. And if there is excessive external rotation on the affected side, that indicates a posterolateral corner injury. You can also hold the toes and just take them up. It is called as the recurvatum hyperextension test, which is also indicative of a posterolateral corner injury. So that is for the posterolateral corner, the dial test. The reverse pivot shift, which I just talked to you about a minute ago, is positive if the patient has a PCL or a posterolateral corner injury. Coming to the meniscal special test, the McMurray's test is used, even though not very pathognomic. It should be done and you should know it in your exam. How do you do a McMurray's test? Basically, you completely flex the knee till the heel touches the buttock, and then you flex, extend with rotation internally or externally. If the foot is internally rotated, adducted and extended and you get a click, then it's a lateral meniscus tear. If the foot is externally rotated, abducted, and while extended you get a click or a pain, then it is a medial meniscus tear. What is more important for me, I would say, is the joint line tenderness. If there is tenderness on the medial joint line or the lateral joint line, then that is more pathognomic of a medial or a lateral meniscus tear. So I give joint line tenderness more importance than a McMurray's test. This is another test which you should do, is the Thessaly test, where both the hands are held by the examiner of the patient, and then you ask the patient to fix the tibia by fixing the foot, and then he rotates the thigh along with the body. And if he gets pain, then that is positive for a meniscus tear. You should do it on both the sides, the affected and unaffected. These are tests you should know. Some examiners may ask you, but we don't do it nowadays. The Apley's test, which is done in the prone position, the Apley's distraction test, which is for ligamentous injuries, and Apley's compression test, which can test if there is a meniscal pathology. Coming to the last few special tests is the Wilson test. This is for the osteochondritis dissecans. Again, not commonly done, but some examiners may ask you. The knee is flexed to 90 to 100 degrees and the tibia is rotated internally. This is where most commonly the osteochondritis dissecans is, and it comes in contact with that lesion and the patient gets pain. And then you slightly externally rotate the foot, and the pain goes off. And if the pain goes off when you do the external rotation, then it is a positive Wilson test. That means it could be some chondral lesion on the medial femoral condyle. This is a knee flexion test, which is again an important test to find out whether the valgus deformity, as you can see here, is in the femur or in the tibia. If you flex the knee and the deformity disappears, then the deformity is in the femur. If the deformity still persists, then it could be in the joint line or in the tibia. The last test which you should know is the Ober's test. That is done in the lateral position. You adduct and fully flex the hip, and then abduct, extend, and extend the hip. Slowly release the support against gravity from the leg, allowing the gravity to take leg downwards. If the leg falls down, then it is a positive Ober's test, which indicates that the IT band is damaged. If it doesn't, then that is an intact IT band. So these are the various tests, friends, which you should know. And last 4-5 minutes of my talk, which I will just talk about the investigations. What investigations you should do? The X-rays, the MRI, CT scan, and arthroscopy. And I'll quickly just talk about the X-ray part of it. The X-rays, first of all, you should do the basic AP X-ray, the lateral X-ray, and a full-length X-ray if you have the ability to do it in your center. AP can be a single joint weight bearing and a supine X-ray without weight bearing, a lateral X-ray, a true lateral, and then a full-length X-ray. Also, what you should do, the special view, is the Rosenberg view. How is the Rosenberg view done? It's a PA view where the knee is flexed about 40 degrees, and from behind you take the X-ray, and here you can see the intercondylar notch very well. That is the advantage of the Rosenberg view, notch view it is called. Also, what you can see on the plain AP X-ray, if there is a flattening of the lateral condyle, this is very classical of a discoid meniscus. You can see here the flattening of the condyle is there, and this is quite pathognomic of a discoid meniscus. Sometimes you see the second sign, and we also call it the anterolateral ligament avulsion, which is seen on a plain X-ray, indicates a anterolateral ligament injury along with the ACL. Another important X-ray which you should do is the skyline view. It should be done in 30 degrees of flexion, 45 degrees of flexion, and 90 degrees of flexion, and you do this tangential view, and it gives you a lot of information. You can find out the patellar tilt, the patellar inclination, and the sulcus angle, and this is how you do the measurements. You can visit this slide later, but it's not very difficult to measure the sulcus angle and the the patellar tilt by these measurements. And you can also at times see the bipartite patella. At times it can be a coincidental finding. Patient may have come for something else, and you diagnose the bipartite patella as seen here. Another important X-ray is the stress view. You do a valgus stress view and a varus stress view, and this is important again when you're dealing with medial collateral and the lateral collateral ligament injuries. And if there is opening on the medial side, then it indicates a MCL injury. A lateral side would indicate a lateral collateral ligament injury. You can also do stress views for your ACL and PCL. This is also called as the Bartlett view, where you ask the patient to kneel down on a stool, and then you take a lateral X-ray. As you can see here, because of the compression and the 90 degrees, there is a force here, and you can see displacement of the tibia behind. This is classical of a PCL tear. And if you do an anterior stress test, anterior drawer test, and take an X-ray lateral position, you can find out here that the anterior drawer test is positive, and this is again indicative of an ACL injury. So stress X-rays, varus valgus, anterior and posterior stress X-rays are very useful. Also, you should see on a lateral X-ray, you can calculate the insal-salvati ratio, which is helpful to find out whether there is patella alta or patella baja. Another important line is the Blumenstadt's line, which you should draw in 30 degrees of flexion. And you can see that this line crosses just below the patella through the intercondylar notch. And this is how you measure the index. If the insal-salvati index is less than 0.7, the patella baja is present. If the patellar index is more than insal-salvati ratio is more than 1.5, then it is patella alta, as you can see here. Another important diagnosis you can make on a true lateral X-ray is the trochlear dysplasia, which has been very nicely described by Dijur. There are 4 Dijur signs. You can see the crossing sign, the supratrochlear spur, and you can find out if the trochlear notch is dysplastic by the supratrochlear spur or the crossing sign. And for this, you need a true lateral X-ray. Your technician has to be trained for a true lateral X-ray. And this is how the Dijur classification is. You can get type A, type B, type C, or type D. About the MRI, friends, Dr. Sachin Tapaswi is going to cover in the next talk. So I will not speak anything about the MRI. He's going to give you an excellent talk on the MRI. So friends, as I come to the end of my talk, please remember this acronym for various conditions: CT, Medino, congenital traumatic metabolic inflammatory idiopathic degenerative infective neoplastic neurovascular, others. So this is a good mnemonic for you to remember. Always have the differential diagnosis in your mind. So if you've done your history well, your clinical evaluation well, you will definitely come to a perfect diagnosis. And always remember that have a proper sequence of taking the history as well as your clinical evaluation, come to your provisional differential diagnosis, do the investigations, come to the final diagnosis, and then to a treatment plan. I always like to end my talk by saying the eye does not see what the mind does not know. So the theoretical backup is important. And once you have the experience, you develop your own sequence for your examination of the knee joint. With this, I wish to thank all the office bearers of the IOA, especially Dr. Meena, Dr. Atul, and Dr. Dhawan, who's really been behind this IOA e-Pathshala. I appreciate Dr. Dhawan's effort. Thank you very much, Dr. Dhawan, Dr. Rajgopal, Dr. Meena.